So it's very clear that people are moving back to cities. I think, what's interesting is a lot of people think that it's millennials that are actually leaving us back to cities, but actually that's not the case. Who actually is driving the rebirth of cities is educated and skilled people. It's clustered creatives, what we call the creative class, the knowledge-based part of the workforce, which is about 30% of the American workforce, 42 million Americans that are looking to be back in more urban type of environments for lots of the benefits of cities, right? The benefits of cities being that knowledge work requires people to be together, cluster together environments and ecosystems. So one of the reasons that we created the Urban Lab and the Shack Institute of Real Estate is partly because to be an effective real estate developer, you have to understand cities. You have to understand the community, you have to understand the neighborhoods, you have to understand the places that you're investing in. And for many real estate investors, they don't think about the ecosystem or the environment. On the flip side of that, if you're an urban developer, if you're an economic developer, if you're a city practitioner at times, many of the times you don't understand real estate development. So the idea of the lab is to bring those two communities together, to create a sense of cohesion, to create a sense of a shared language that we can all understand and learn from each other. One of the big issues now as we talk about economic development or real estate development that affects all sectors is this idea of the sharing economy, right? The idea of the city as a platform. What does that mean? The sharing economy is impacting the way we work. It's impacting the types of real estate investments that are being made. Just look at the impact that Airbnb has had on the hospitality sector. We'll do a lot of understanding who cities are and the types of people that are living in cities, right? So for instance, many folks think of Brooklyn as the epicenter for the creative economy. Really what our research has suggested is that if you really want to understand Brooklyn's economy is where the quote-unquote creative class live, but it is not where the creative class work yet. They're still working in Manhattan. If you want to understand Queens or the Bronx, right, many of those economies are still driven by meds and eds. Some of it is understanding how a place like Long Island City, for instance, has gone through a revitalization from an industrial economy of warehouses and food manufacturing and production and some artisanal type manufacturing to this idea of that it's a creative economy now. I think as we think about cities, or as a lab thinks about cities, one of the things that we're going to focus on is this typology of cities, right? Wanting to understand how cities share commonalities, but how are they different? And so one of the things I think the lab will do is not only look at the superstar cities, but we also want to look at places like Detroit and Newark and Oakland to say, how do we create a revitalization in these cities as well? You're starting to see urban environments take on characteristics that are much more suburban, right? The idea that now we're having to think about safety in our cities, we're now thinking about green space in our cities, we're now thinking about schools. And on the flip side of that, we're also starting to see suburban areas that are successful growing suburban areas, be much more urban-like, right? The sense that they have to have walkability, they have to access to transit. So this idea of the blurring versus suburban lines, I think, are happening and becoming much more. The lines between the two are becoming much more oblique, I think. So it will be interesting to see as the United States makes major investments in infrastructure. Will that be urban infrastructure? Will that be transit? Will that be ways to think about the connection of some of our communities together?